Cheers, Worcester. It's August the 28th, 2019. This is 508, a show about Worcester. This is Brendan Milliken.
How's it going, brother?
It's going well. I'm Michael Benedetti, and our guest today is Victor Infante.
Hello.
Your favorite reporter from that Bircher rag, the Telegram and Gazette. Your favorite editor from the Once and Future Worcester magazine. How are you doing?
I am doing fine. I have too many jobs, but I'm doing well.
Well, it's great to have you on the show today. I want to talk about economics, and I want to talk about crime, but I also definitely want to talk about your paper.
Well, glad to be here.
All right, and you can look at your level here and make sure you're kind of...
Oh, okay.
So there you go. What are your titles right now?
Okay. Technically speaking, I am the entertainment editor for the Worcester Telegram and Gazette still.
Okay.
And I'm the content editor for Worcester Magazine, which is kind of a made-up title, but it's my title anyways.
Is there an editor for Worcester Magazine?
Yes. The editor for Worcester Magazine is my immediate supervisor, Nancy Campbell.
Okay.
But she's also supervising all of the lifestyle section for the Telegram and Worcester Living Magazine and Worcester Magazine. So I'm the guy who's like the guy on the ground with the content for what goes in Worcester Magazine.
And on August the 28th, 2019, what is Worcester Magazine?
Worcester Magazine is
because it's been changing.
It is still changing. And I expect that to be true for at least another year or so. But what it is at the moment is it's a story about culture in Worcester.
Okay.
That's how I like to see of it.
Okay.
This is a story about what it means to live in Worcester.
It's the paper of record for Worcester's.
No, it is
culture.
not the paper of record. I do not like that term for this paper. No, because that's a very particular... No, that's what a daily newspaper is.
Oh, okay.
I want to tell stories about people. I don't want to tell... We don't want to tell stories about municipal politics.
Well, I was going to say it's the paper of record for the entertainment.
That is,
but it's maybe not trying to be that comprehensive. It's sort of like it's whatever it's
pretty
about.
It's pretty comprehensive on the entertainment side, actually.
All right.
It's probably the most comprehensive it's been since the 90s in the entertainment side.
And you have here the last. We can hold this up. You have here this most recent issue, I guess, the one. It says the never-ending journey on the front, and this is about.
Being an
undocumented immigrant, yeah.
And particularly being an undocumented immigrant in Worcester.
Yeah. So this to me feels like not where I would say, oh, this is a culture desk topic. This feels more like a traditional alt weekly kind of article.
And that's how we're running it. That's the thing. Everybody came in. There was a lot of people extrapolated what they were afraid was going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
From the very limited announcements that we made about how it's happening.
Yeah.
I'll admit that.
Because it was basically like, I mean, I know you can't comment too much about some of this, so I can comment about it. It was basically like, we're firing everybody, and we're merging it with the Telegram. Goodbye.
Yeah, and I think there was a set number of decisions that happened by different people at different levels in the organization.
Yeah.
So the first thing happens, we have these bloody corporate-wide layoffs,
right.
And they are what they are, and I can't comment too much about that, but you can tell I'm not fond.
Mm-hmm.
But that left Worcester Magazine with one editorial guy, Bill Shaner. It became pretty apparent on the ground that was untenable.
Okay.
So when decisions get made closer to the ground, they make more sense.
Okay.
I think that's true in most things. The decisions where we could just axe Worcester Magazine,
mm-hmm.
or we could do something else and kind of integrate it with what we're doing.
And keep that brand around.
And keep that brand. Now, the decision was made that brand, and I was the first person to say it, that brand was more important than the Go brand, which was we had been running for a couple years in the Telegram. So we killed Go and moved its regular features to Worcester Magazine.
Okay. And how are you enjoying it?
I'm having so much fun with this thing. This is literally the best work and most fun I've had at my entire 17 years.
I'm really happy to hear that. I know that it's been like a super dramatic and traumatic situation at your organization. It's nice whenever like at least somebody is feeling
I get to work with writers like Richard Duckett and Bill Shaner. I get to work with freelancers like Sarah Connell Sanders and Matt Toda and Barbara Hool, and these are wonderful people. These are amazing writers.
You get to hang out in this awkward podcasting closet with us.
I get to hang out in awkward podcasts and have people say nasty things about me on Facebook. It's wonderful. How can I not like this?
You might be one of the few people in Worcester I've never said anything nasty about.
Oh, thank you.
Publicly, anyways. That. I had a question for you, because I thought it was interesting how you were very quick to correct Mike correctly so, about the paper of record title.
I feel strongly about that.
Yeah,
that
no,
role.
clearly. But you also sound very passionate about at least the potential behind Worcester Magazine. And I'm sure there's deep down in your heart of hearts, you still probably have concerns about, the way things were handled or
totally.
where things have gone from.
I don't think I've made any secret about that.
Yeah, no, but I don't want to put you in a weird spot on that. I'm saying if you were to put on just I'm a professional journalist and the future of journalism can still be bright hat for a moment. If that hat exists, let's pretend it does.
Sure. I actually do believe that.
Is it possible that maybe as the format changes, in terms of actual dead trees and whatnot, that there is the potential really for a good outcome for Worcester Magazine? Because I thought all I was thinking we described is wow, if you're involved with both ends of that and you can draw a clear distinction between what the paper of record is supposed to be doing from a political perspective or a government perspective or a public affairs perspective versus what this is supposed to be doing, there's probably things that cross the public the public record, the paper of record side of the business, and people say, yeah, that's not really a good fit for us, and then just cast the thought aside, as well as on the Worcester Magazine side.
And that's always been, and I've worked in both I don't know how much you know about my background, but I started at Worcester Magazine.
But I mean,
in the 90s.
There might be this real, at least listening to you talk, there should be this really cool potential if the management sees the potential, at least in terms of from a funding perspective. Yeah, that instead of potential stories just getting lost to history because they hit the wrong person's desk, now all of you are in one room.
You have said something very, very important.
All right.
You have said the most
That's
important.
One, Mike. I've done one good thing on this show after 10 years.
Literally the most important thing to think about when you're thinking about how this has happened.
Okay.
Is happening. Everybody came out and said, and this is kind of partially our fault from the way we presented it, saying, oh, Worcester Magazine's not going to cover news anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And to be fair, I was the one who made the decision to change the news section here to voices.
Sure.
I didn't want it to be just opinion because I wanted to run real stories there.
Yeah.
But we wanted to get away from the limitations of those terms.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because what everybody's saying when they're saying Worcester Magazine doesn't cover news anymore, they're reacting to the fact that we don't cover municipal politics anymore. Right. But if Bill Shaner and Nick Katsopoulos both write an objective news story, and they both know the difference, they're both fine reporters, about a city council meeting, they're going to effectively write the same story.
Right.
There's no reason for us to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And if both of them are writing those stories, then what's getting lost?
Exactly.
That's the question that has hovered over this whole thing that we ask ourselves all the time. What stories aren't we telling?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things too that Worcester, maybe it's a generational thing, because I can remember kind of the tail end of this. Those universes used to overlap, right?
Sure.
So maybe there was a time where Worcester Magazine went a little bit too far into the newsy side of things. Maybe
I think that argument can be made.
And then vice versa, maybe it was a stretch to have the Daily trying to keep up with culture reporting that oftentimes is best handled in a long form, deep dive sort of way. And I think it's what you always did a good job at the Telegram in that capacity. It wasn't like every single day, what am I going to have today in the paper? Because that's not really how culture works. Sometimes Monday happens.
And I have the sort of advantage that I'm an editor, not a reporter, so I don't have to have me meeting a daily deadline.
But there was an overlap that existed not too long ago where the people that Nick Katsopoulos was effectively covering via his politics column were actually at the bar at Ralph's, in a part of that scene, right?
Sure.
Like I remember the first time I was a part of the Worcester Magazine Best of. I believe it was the year that Tim Murray was running for lieutenant governor, and so we were both a part of it. But Tim was very much at home in that universe, like being surrounded by the Worcester Magazine crowd of artists and musicians and whatnot. He was not weirded out being the guy in a suit for that photo shoot. And nor should he be, because I think people would be surprised how many current politicians and city hall folks are probably more comfortable in that universe. They just have the suit is one more uniform or costume.
Sure. The first time I met Jim McGovern was in the 90s at Eleni's Midnight Cafe.
Exactly.
And
right.
I know he came to I wasn't there for that one, but he came to the poetry reading at one night.
Yeah, and he was probably coloring on the placemats as well, hanging up on the wall. Right. And I think that's something that we've lost sight of, is that just because you're a politician or you work in City Hall and that's what you're known for as your day-to-day, doesn't mean you're not an actual human being who goes to poetry readings and rock clubs. And there's something in my head that's very powerful about someone like Bill maybe being able to step back and focus more on the culture. And if there's just a passing mention that there was a really great show somewhere, and here's one of the people I saw in the crowd or whatnot, tying together those kind of, again, if you're telling stories of people, pointing out that some of these people on both sides are actual people, humans.
Sure. And I mean, I'll look at the work Bill did with the skate park, and with the skateboarding lessons out at Crompton Park. People don't necessarily look at that as an immensely political story. But the fact of the matter is, it's dealing with people from low-income parts of town, kids from low incomes, and it's dealing with joy.
Yeah.
And it's looking at their lives, that there is joy in their lives.
Yes.
Their lives are important. And there were politicians in that story and his other stories, and city officials and such, and they have a role in that.
Yeah.
But they don't always have to have the starring role.
No, exactly. But it's also nice to be able to recognize that there are probably members of the Worcester Police Department, probably at least one city councilor who can do a kickflip. And whether or not people know that, they're probably there. Like, there's at least a couple people that I wouldn't be surprised if they could actually comfortably pull off a kickflip, maybe roll an ankle in the process, but the landing would actually happen.
Harry Rosen, the challenge is on.
But yeah, and I think that's something that we kind of lose sight of. Mike and I were talking about this offline recently too, that it's very easy to use 508 Bike Life as an example, right? Like, I was saying to Mike the other day, I would be fascinated to take a look at the rise of that movement, not just in Worcester, but like that sort of, bikes as opposed to violence movement across cities across the United States in relationship to defunding of public resources like pools.
Sure.
Because if you go back to 100 years, you find very clearly the idea, the philosophy behind a lot of public resources like pools and baseball teams and fields was to get rambunctious young men off the streets. And it's like we use that language to like describe like young men that were just going to cause problems if we didn't give them something constructive to do. And like, here's a great example of us over the last 15 years defunding a lot of those services.
And then we have to relearn that lesson every 100 years.
Or at least just
we have to relearn that lesson every 20 years.
And skateboarding is a good example of that, because when I was a kid, I think, at least in Worcester, skateboarding was viewed more as it was at its point in its ebb and flow, where it was more sort of suburban in its mentality and whatnot. And whereas today, I think it's far more likely that you're going to find people that are living downtown. You can see skateboards all over Main South. There's a reason Eastern Border, it was a smart move to go to Jackson Street. The demographics have changed. And recognizing that and recognizing where the needs are is huge. That is political.
And the best way we can handle that with the resources that we have, with the voice that we are trying to present, is to tell these stories in the terms of people.
Yeah.
Not policy.
All right.
And that's where I'm at.
Fantastic.
Speaking of people, do you guys want to talk about crime next, or do you guys want to talk about economics next? I kind of want to talk about economics next. Victor, this is a part of the show called the Journal of Worcester Studies, where we look at different reports regarding Worcester. And here is one called, it's a report from the American Council for Energy Efficient Economy. It's called the 2019 City Clean Energy Scorecard, and it's a report about how different cities are doing on energy efficiency.
Page 1 of the Telegram today.
It was. So, yes, and I am unhappy with the Telegram article, but I will not reference the Telegram article. I would just reference the story. I would rank this report as I would not rank this report as very good. I would not rank this report as very bad. I would rank this report as not very helpful.
What is this report trying to tell us, Mike?
This report is trying to say, how's your city doing energy efficiency-wise, and compared to the other 74 cities in the United States that we, not arbitrarily, but semi-arbitrarily, there's definitely a lot of judgment calls as to what cities make it and what cities don't. And we're low on the list, as the Telegram would say. But and it's looking at things like, how energy efficient are you? How much mass transit stuff are you doing? What kind of initiatives do you have? How many city employees are messing around with these different issues? And basically, denser cities are more energy efficient, and larger cities have more employees and initiatives touching on every different topic under the sun. So when you look at who's doing well on the list, it's big cities and dense cities. And so it's an apples and oranges thing. They actually say it very well in the report. They say smaller cities could have been disadvantaged by metrics geared toward larger cities, especially those in transportation policies related to public transit and smart growth. And if all you're going by is population, Worcester looks like a reasonably large city. And if you're looking at it by anything other than raw population, Worcester looks like a smaller city. And because they're not Yeah, so like that's the issue. It's just an apples and oranges thing. This report.
When I was in college, I took a class on sociology, and the first thing we were doing was studying the rates of poverty of women in different countries.
Okay.
And that was my exact same argument, saying, well, if we're comparing the levels of poverty in Chad to the levels of poverty in Germany, of course they're going to be different.
Right.
And that the sociology professor eventually convinced me that that fact alone is actually worth looking at, even if
Okay.
even that difference, even if there are other factors that continue it. Maybe the rankings not, but the other information that comes with it is definitely of interest.
I think there is interesting information, and I think that energy efficiency is important, and that we should do better at energy efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
We should also do better at energy efficiency reporting, but or reports. But so I would be really interested to see what the ACEEE thinks about Worcester's energy efficiency score year to year. Are we getting better? Are we getting worse? Are other cities
That's a very good
moving
question.
up or down? It's sort of useful information, or it's interesting to just to see somebody else's who's run some numbers to say how are you doing. Again, like I feel like the problem is when you compare Worcester to the other 74 cities on the list. I feel like Worcester is an apple, and all of them are some kind of an orange. If any of them are apples, I'm not sure which ones are apples.
Where did we fall on the list in terms
I
of?
mean, we fall.
Like third from last, aren't we?
No, we're not that bad. I can flip through. I mean, we're in the lower third of the list.
Okay.
We're number 55.
All right.
Yeah. So and honestly, a lot of cities are pretty close to tied. So we're really you would say we're in the lower half rather than the lower third, because the cities that are higher than us in the lower half are higher than us by like half a point.
That's where I think I would have to agree with you at least a little bit in terms of making sure the cities were on par. Like Worcester, it's not just in terms of development, but I think Worcester tends to almost always lag other similar sized cities, or especially large cities, by like 10 years in terms of discovering things. Or like our economy always seems to be about 10 years behind the curve. Like we're just having gentrification talks now, right? Like that's the TED Talks about gentrification literally peaked a decade ago, right? This is I think if you looked at it like property values, you would see that we're just now starting to bounce back from the collapse back in 2008, or at least from a homeowner perspective, property values seem like they're just starting to catch up. I would be curious to see, in a case of a study like this, how much did they take into consideration that Worcester development is really just kind of starting within the last couple of years, right?
Oh,
so like
we're going to
let's just say Boston
we're
is
going to get into that like 2 reports from now, but please continue.
But I mean, if Boston is on that list, like Boston might appear to be a more energy efficient city, but it has gone through a massive construction boom where places like the Seaport, that was surface parking lots now, and now it's some of the most dense construction in any city of a comparable size. Every one of those buildings was built to some LEED certification or whatnot to ensure that they're energy efficient. It's going to have to throw off the curve in terms of...
Right. It is a weird ranking because it's basically like, okay, like if Germany blows up half your city and then you have to rebuild it, but you build it according to LEED specifications, you're doing great according to this report. According to anything else, you're maybe having a problem.
And it's not true, but it's still true, but it might not be a fair comparison in the sense that Worcester, we're doing a lot of our construction now. Like our development is really just kind of getting underway in the last decade or so, changing the structure of the city. But
so I want to get back to economics, but since we touched briefly on mass transit, I wanted to ask a mass transit related question or topic. Have either of you guys seen the Bradley Cooper movie Midnight Meat Train?
No.
I tried to watch this like a year ago, and I couldn't get through it because it was so boring to me. And with Gary Rosen talking about is the WRTA obsolete, I was like, I'm going to go back and try to watch it again. I tried to watch it this week. I couldn't get through it. Halfway through, I felt too bored. So but I've been trying to think, like, transportation-wise, should the WRTA get a midnight meat train? And based on my attempt to watch it twice, I'm going to say no. Like, I'm not educated enough because I haven't seen the whole movie or read the Clive Barker story that it's based on. Mm-hmm. I'm not educated enough to say it's a strong opinion, but that's where my gut is. Just throwing that out there. We have the Worcester Economic Index. Thomas White at Assumption has released the quarterly Worcester Economic Index. He writes the Worcester area economy decreased at a 0.9% annualized rate during the second quarter of 2019. According to the latest estimates of the Worcester Economic Index, the drop follows a first weak quarter during which economic activity was down 0.3%. In contrast, Massachusetts and the United States economies grew during the second quarter, albeit at slower rates than the first quarter. According to the latest estimates from Mass Benchmarks, the state economy grew at 1.4% in the second quarter. It had grown at 2.7 in the first. Nationally, the U.S. real GDP grew by 2.1%, which fell short of the 3.1% rate of the first quarter. So I still don't understand how Thomas White puts this index together. My best guess is that it's basically the average of local unemployment rates.
Tea leaves, Mike. Tea
And it's
leaves.
mathematically more complicated than taking the average, but it is something like taking the average of unemployment rates. Anyway, I want to throw that out there because Brendan had brought up recently this thing from the Worcester Business Journal, which is the article "Behind for Years, Greater Worcester Catching Up to Peers in Some Important Economic Metrics." And they say, last summer, a Worcester Business Journal analysis found that during the longest sustained period of economic growth in U.S. history, where developments are trending towards urbanization, the economy of Greater Worcester lagged significantly behind U.S. metro areas. And we should mention Greater Worcester. It's really central Massachusetts and northeast Connecticut.
Yeah,
it's
we're down. I think we're down to Bridgeport. Is that what we agreed?
it's
Bridgeport,
it's
Connecticut?
way down there. It's way down there. It's from what the heck is that city up the north? I'm trying to remember the northernmost city in Worcester County.
Oh,
Fitchburg, Leominster, and then
It's north of Fitchburg,
I
Columbus.
mean,
Anyway,
city or town?
a town.
Okay, that would.
They're
be
all cities to me.
No,
Air.
We can think about
Maybe.
this. We
No.
can think about this while I say.
I know where it is. It's
351 cities
Anyway.
and towns. Let's go through them all, Mike.
So they say that we were that we had been lagging behind U.S. metro areas of similar size in New England's other major cities, showing the much ballyhooed Worcester Renaissance was largely buzzy talk with little substance. I agree 100. I disagree 100% with that analysis, but we can get into that later. In an update of the study this year, results show Greater Worcester is starting to make up the ground it lost from being behind the pack since the end of the Great Recession by outpacing its national and regional peers in each of the last 2 years. Like last year, they're using the Census Bureau definition of the Greater Worcester metro area, which includes Worcester County and Windham County, Connecticut. We got to come up with a different name. We got to come up with I'm going to call it. We got to come up with a different name
For what?
for. I'm going to call it CEMANECT. For Central Massachusetts and Connecticut. No, Central Massachusetts and Northwest Connecticut.
This is kind of what I was getting at though earlier when I said Worcester tends to lag, and I think it's not just economics or development, right? I mean, you could probably make the argument that if you looked at signups or new registrations for Facebook, Worcester would probably, just like we are on par with some developing nations in terms of infant mortality rates, like we would probably have a sign-up rate that's similar to the countries that we also see having similar infant mortality rates, because we're lagging in terms of technology. And you hear this from, I think, on the technology side, if you talk to young people who try and use like contemporary dating apps and whatnot, that the pools that they see for like things like Tinder or whatnot, they just don't exist the way they do in even similar sized cities that are thought of to be college towns and whatnot. We lag. We just, and it's not a bad thing. We exist in a little bit of a bubble. I think that's where reports like this, while they're or stories like this, while they are kind of helpful in terms of articulating how we may be growing the direction we're heading. Again, that outside comparison just really rubs me the wrong way because we're just getting started with a lot of our development. But it's also, the important thing is from an economic perspective, that's kind of a good thing because while the rest of the country is talking, recession fears and whatnot, cities that lag tend to make themselves a little bit more recession-proof in the sense that
we're out of that. So we're on a different cycle.
If you're a homeowner and you just started seeing over the last 3 to 5 years your property values catch up to where they should have been after the last recession, the potential drop along with the rest of the national economy when a national economic crisis happens can't be as big as, say, the drop in the Bay Area or the Boston area, which were some of the first out of the gate to start seeing increase in property values or economic growth. It's not that it's a good thing because we still lag, but we also insulate ourselves a little bit more by not being so explosive in either our growth or collapse.
I'm very curious to see what happens with the next census.
Yeah.
Because I'm really not sure how valid our ideas of Worcester's demographics are right now.
Yeah. I think you're right.
We're 10 years out of I think we're larger. I think we're more diverse.
Yep.
I think our incomes are probably larger.
But how
I'm
much?
not sure.
How much have they grown, say, in comparison to an annual cost of living increase? Because I always find
that would be a really good question. I know I've hardly gotten a raise in the past
Yeah,
15
and
years,
and
so
you're probably not alone in
that's,
that one, and
that's
it's
normal in the business. But
and a lot of, but I think a lot of industries that if Worcester is mostly made up of education and healthcare employees, those are not necessarily, with the exception of areas where there are still a big union presence. Those aren't necessarily areas that see massive increases in wages year
No.
to year, right? They're either going to be contractual or they're going to be gradual based on cost of living, and that's oftentimes more of a local cost of living than a national cost of living increase. Yeah.
I first of all, I think CEMANECT is what we get to call it. Central, it's central,
give you time to think about that.
Central Massachusetts, northeastern Connecticut. It's not Greater Worcester, and it's not the city of Worcester we're talking about. We're talking about CEMANECT.
Sure.
gotcha.
So CEMANECT, has had a couple of slow quarters, but over the last couple of years, CEMANECT has been outperforming the other nects that you compare it to. Brendan, I just want to reiterate what you said about the Worcester Renaissance. Like, I feel like it's largely buzzy talk with little substance. Like, I feel like the Worcester Renaissance that we've been talking about, I can see how somebody would hear Worcester Renaissance and think, I guess everybody's income has doubled. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, like, there's a guy, and he is depressed, and he's spending his free time smoking weed and playing video games, so he won't be depressed, and his career is going nowhere, and his girlfriend, he has no girlfriend, or his girlfriend's terrible, and his roommate is definitely terrible. And then this guy one day wakes up, and he's like, I'm going to start going to night school. I'm going to start paying down my credit card debt. I'm going to do less drugs and less video games. I'm going to work out more. I'm going to eat better. I'm going to try to be more focused. I'm going to talk to my boss about whether there's a career path here. This is a thing many of us have seen, and we know that this guy, 2 years down the line, is going to be doing terrific to how he's doing now.
Sure.
But if you're measuring this guy on metrics like how much money is in his checking account or free time, he's going to look like he's doing actually worse than before.
Or how far has his peers that he graduated college or high school with progressed in the same amount of time? It's,
Right.
It's not a fair metric because you're
But-
talking about a
right.
young person that hasn't, there's not enough time to really make comparisons.
Yes, but anybody who saw how Gary Rosen changed his life during that that period of time is going to be like, it's a Gary Rosen renaissance.
Yeah.
Like Gary is going to be. I mean, like, we're going to see that show up in free time and
number of
checking
combs
account
handed out.
and some kind of comb-based metric. We're going to see that a couple of years down the line, 2, 4, 10, 40 years down the line.
Right.
But there's no doubt that there's a Gary Rosen renaissance in this scenario.
I use the example all the time, and this is a while ago because it was well before my son was born, probably around the time that we first met. I remember walking down Harrison Street with Duncan Arsenault, whose birthday it is today. Happy birthday, Duncan.
Happy birthday.
Walking down Harrison Street, we were both hanging around the Lucky Dog a lot at the time, and it was midday. For whatever reason, we were down on Green Street. We take a walk down Harrison Street, and there's this guy on a ladder chipping away at dentiles on the side of what is now the Crompton Collective building.
Yeah.
And it was Dino. And it was within an hour, Duncan and I were in the basement of what is now, or like what's now the White Room at a Crompton Collective. And he's walking us through like these stacks of all these crazy recovered materials. And this guy is just like buzzing, telling the story about how he's going to, he bought the building, he's going to rehab everything. And Duncan and I are looking at each other like, what is going on here? Because we had no idea this person even existed. And now when you view it from like that limited one person perspective, and you hear a city at large or the whole county having conversations about, do we have enough parking? It's like, wait a second, you're missing the point entirely. It was within my lifetime. This was a bombed out neighborhood that people only came to after the sun went down.
Within your
And-
infant child's lifetime.
Yeah, I mean, not even a full person ago. Nobody was down here. It was basically District 9 until the sun went down, and then it got worse. Then we just found reasons to beat the crap out of each other. And it's this amazing neighborhood that literally started off the radar, right? Like it was just a weird guy on a ladder chipping away at an old building.
If I can segue back
Yeah.
to Worcester Magazine for 1 second here.
Please do.
Because
Please do.
these are actually the sorts of stories, that first story, that I am interested in
Mm-hmm.
finding. And I know we have a business section at the Business Matters at the Telegram, and they do an amazing job. But I'm always really interested in these little stories underneath everything.
Right.
These stories of somebody who looked at the Crompton Collective building and said, I can do that.
Yeah.
I can turn that into something. I'm and there's so much of it. I think our freelancer, Sarah Connell Sanders, my favorite thing about her writing is her sense of discovery.
Mm-hmm.
She is so enthusiastic when she discovers something, whether it's an artist or
Right.
a restaurant or something. And I love that because there's so much to discover right now.
Yeah.
And we keep learning more about the place that we're standing in.
Yes.
So
No,
I'm excited.
you're spot on, and I think that's how when you're talking about the Renaissance, or they're talking about the Renaissance being just a buzz term or whatnot. I think it misses the point entirely. That like again, there are those of us that we're not that old, right? But I mean, we're getting there, but we're not that old. We grew up in a city that kind of looked down upon itself, but there were still a lot of us that had a great deal of pride in the city that we came from. And in a very short period of time, we've seen that spin around where suddenly the majority of Boston media is looking at us and saying, this is a really, really cool place to be. But there are enough of us that remember how we got to that point, and it was actually a lot of hard work. It wasn't a city hall thing. There were some people in politics, like, again, Tim Murray, that were actively engaged in trying to get some of these pieces moving and whatnot. But a lot of it was just people with wacky ideas doing weird stuff, and it's gotten to the point now where it seems like it's this big ball that's rolling out of control, and maybe it is. But
well, I think it's a little different if you're looking at it from outside.
Yeah.
Because I moved here as an adult
Sure.
in 1996, December 1996.
good years.
I was only here for a bit, and then I moved away and back to California and came back. But I thought Worcester was amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody else is telling me that this town is bombed out and it's dead. And I'm like, this is the coolest place I've ever been to.
No,
the first day I'm in
okay.
town, the first day I had visited in October. I was to visit my girlfriend before I moved there. And we went, she's like, oh, we have to go to an art exhibit. I'm like, okay, I go to art exhibits all the time. And we go to this bombed out factory, and I'm like, are we sure we're in the right place? Because there's nobody on the street, and it's looking a little sketchy. And we take this rickety old elevator that has probably never been inspected.
Yeah.
And there's this amazing Jamie Johnston exhibit in the Grove Street Gallery.
Yeah.
And I thought this place was fantastic.
And I think a lot of us that were doing weird stuff so the 90s was my high school and immediately thereafter period. And I can think back to days hanging around in weird coffee shops that no longer exist in Worcester. And if you paint that mental picture of what it looked like then now, you realize that everybody that was within arm's reach have gone on to be like small business owners that are thought very highly of, running galleries in the city, went off to amazing music careers. But at the time, they were just weirdos who were doing fun drugs because we had lots of them in Worcester, like everybody else. And I feel like when we're talking about the Renaissance, that's when it actually happened.
I agree.
It was these seeds were planted, and I don't want to like boost up like Gen X like we had it all figured out. Although
No, but
compared to boomers and millennials, we did.
There was a lot of stuff. That's where that energy came from.
Totally, and it was being in a city that I think historically had kind of looked down upon itself, but being around and somewhat free in a period of time when there was so much going on, you couldn't help but actually see potential. And I think what we look at we talk about a renaissance in terms of the last 5 years. I think it actually kicked itself off 25 years ago, and that's the thing we don't give ourselves enough credit for.
I want to talk about one last economics thing. This is a report called Time Varying Housing Supply Elasticities in U.S. Housing Cycles. And the first line of the report is, in a panel of 254 U.S. metro areas, we estimate housing supply elasticities to be substantially lower today than they were during the housing boom of the 2000s. Housing elasticity meaning when the price of housing goes up, do people build more houses to fit the demand, or do they not? And the price of housing just keeps going up forever. And the last time we had the price started going up, we built a bunch of houses, and this time the price is going up and people are not building a bunch of houses. And these guys who wrote the report have different theories. Alex Tabarrok, who pointed us towards this report, he thinks that it might be because housing supply remains especially constrained in coastal cities by regulation and limited land capacity, and those constraints are becoming more binding over time. In other words, the previous boom filled the infill. I just throw that out there. You mentioned housing prices moving in a good direction. I feel like elasticity, supply not keeping up with the demand is a potential problem down the road. Not
totally.
this month.
No, it is, and it's that's one of those things. I was having a similar conversation earlier this week in regards to the Doherty Memorial High School project and whatnot. That it's one of the things that's going to be obviously a very contentious conversation around the site for it, but one of the things that everyone, regardless of where they stand with that conversation, needs to keep in mind is that building a high school from the ground up in a city like Worcester is actually getting harder and harder every day because there isn't as much developable land, right? There's actually no land to build up anymore, which is why you see in larger, as you mentioned, coastal cities, they're getting taller and denser from a rental perspective, maybe a condominium perspective. But in secondary markets like Worcester, where I think the focus is still more on single-family housing or small format multifamily housing, and we've never really gone the skyline route. Like we're just starting to build up now. I don't think we really know where to go with that. And you're not demoing entire neighborhoods to build new neighborhoods. That wouldn't make sense. So like, if you wanted more houses in Worcester, where would you put them? Like there was a story in the Telegram either today or yesterday about that last big parcel of property up on the Holden line up by Salisbury Street that finally, it was the Higgins property, I believe. It was, it was supposed to be converted into like 250 units of elder housing back before the market collapsed. They're just getting around to doing that now. It's stagnated in terms of the build-outs because the market collapsed. But there aren't many parcels of land that size in Worcester proper that you could build new housing. So your only other option is to go up, and we're not really at the point where we've been squeezed into that direction yet. So some of those numbers are kind of weird to look at because, of course, a city's going to stagnate until the pressure gets so great that it forces you to start going up.
You know, I kind of want to talk about crime, but I feel like I'm going to get onto a thing about serial killers, and we're about two-thirds of the way through the show. Should I talk about serial killers and we can continue at the next episode?
Like good serial killers?
I mean, from the perspective of numbers wise, the best serial killers.
Local?
Yeah. So this is I'm gonna read you page 102 of the history of the Department of Police Service of Worcester, Massachusetts, from 1674 to 1900. This is a 1900 book about the history of the police in Worcester, and it's a cool book. And I'm just gonna read you this page. I'll read it verbatim until we want to interrupt at any point. Isaac Isaacson, living at 51.5 Crescent Street, was shot on Garden Street on the night of March the 2nd, 1896. He refused to disclose the name of his murderer before his death, which was 2 days later at the city hospital. The shooting was the result of an old country fight. Walter Brinkworth shot Bessie McDonough at her home on Columbia Street, December 27th, 1898, and then shot himself. Both recovered, but Brinkworth is paralyzed. The shooting was the outcome of a love affair. The Worcester police assisted the state police in the detection of Edward Cunningham, who killed William Baxter in Holden, unsurprisingly, in July 1893. That was the most revolting axe murder that ever took place in Holden, Baxter being killed with an axe. Cunningham was sentenced to imprisonment for life. John A. Crisell...
Wait a second. So they're saying that was the most revolting axe murder. What did the other axe murders in Holden look like?
I haven't...
Clearly from that
It's
language
the most revolting
using,
murder.
Oh, okay. I thought it was.
Yeah.
It made it sound like it was just in the axe murder category.
Oh, no,
that
no,
was
no.
the
So
most
we're saying that Holden has something to aspire to.
Murder what? I mean, let me tell you something. This is going to get dark, so let me keep going. John A. Crisell shot and killed John A. Cornell in a house on Millbury Avenue on the night of December 23rd, 1892. Crisell was arrested by officers Dunn, Fireberg, and Hackett. Mikor Kevorkian shot and killed Khazar Karavarian on the Common July the 4th, 1891, and was arrested by Officer W.R. Ramsdale. The shooting was at the time of a balloon ascension, Kevorkian claiming he shot at the balloon. Sentences for these crimes were short periods in the House of Correction. I actually looked that one up in the newspapers and could not find a contemporary report on this in the papers.
Shooting at a hot air balloon?
At a hot air balloon thing on the Common, I think.
How angry? How much you must really hate balloons if you're gonna.
I think you hate Khazar Karavarian, and you're like, this is the perfect cover. Nobody will ever suspect if I shoot him, and I can just say I was shooting at the balloon, and they'll never, no jury would ever convict me.
Perfectly reasonable.
The Worcester police worked for over a year in connection with the state police to cause the arrest of Paul Mueller for the murder of the Newton family in West Brookfield. Mueller murdered Francis D. Newton, wife and daughter Elsie, with an axe on the night of January the 8th, 1897, and was seen walking in the direction of the Boston and Albany Railroad, where he took a train, leaving at 1 o'clock in the morning. Not a trace of him has been found since.
Huh.
So this Paul A. Mueller is potentially a guy who killed a family in Brookfield in a terrible crime and then disappeared. He's also potentially the most prolific serial killer in American history. There's a book from a couple years ago which was written by Bill James and his daughter, Rachel. Bill James is the sabermetrics guy, the Moneyball guy, the baseball stats guy, who in his old age is working for the Red Sox and researching serial killers. And they were looking at trying to connect different unsolved or questionably solved serial killings in the Midwest in the like 100 years ago, basically the 1910s, and they started finding more and more connections. And this is the earliest one that they found that they felt like was connected with this series of murders. If the murderer, basically his MO is he would kill an entire family with an axe, with the blunt side of an axe. And this guy Paul Mueller, this is the only crime he was ever identified for in his life from the records that they can find. And so the Worcester police worked on but did not solve this murder in 1898. And their best guess is that he killed 98 more people in the U.S. Then possibly he emigrated back to Germany and maybe killed some more people. Although by then he was in his 60s, so maybe he was slowing down. Anyway, this is a great book called The Man from the Train. Everybody who loves Worcester or who just wants to read stuff should read this book.
So this guy just traveled the country, potentially starting in Worcester or ending in Worcester?
He started in Brookfield, West Brookfield, which at the time had no people in it. So it was basically an extension of it had like a constable or two, but basically the Worcester police would be and the state polices who would come out and investigate something like this.
But so he found his taste for bludgeoning people with the blunt side of an axe in Worcester County, and then traveled the country to the tune of 98 murders doing the same.
Right. This is right. This is Bill James's claim or thinking.
All roads do lead to Worcester.
And this was extremely detailedly reported at the time. And this is Bill James' surmise, is that Mueller gets mad at the guy he's working for, and has probably also always had some fairly nutso desires, and just ends up acting them out this one time. And then he's like, great, I'm ready to become a specialist in this. I'll do it for the next 20 years. And basically his MO is that, or the MO of these murders is that it would be a family who would be killed near train tracks. They would be killed with the blunt side of an axe. They would be killed. The father would be killed first. The children would be killed last. Any female children, there would be some kind of creepy sex stuff happening. The killer would cover all of the windows and frequently all of the mirrors inside with cloth. He would frequently have a burning kerosene lamp with the chimney, the glass piece, removed. That piece, I don't understand what that's about. That's kind of very mysterious. But yeah, and not only do they think that he killed 98 people, and they're sort of like, we know that he killed 50 people.
Mm-hmm.
They're convinced. They're like, we definitely killed 50 people. It's like there's 70% chance he killed some other people and 30% some other ones. If we just multiply the numbers, probably like 98. Yeah. There's another 11 people who they think were either executed or lynched for crimes that he committed. That they would basically, so he would basically, at his peak, when he really had it down, he would jump off the train, walk around at dusk along the train tracks, see your house, see that you had an axe outside the house, see that you had a family, be like, great. If he had an extra set of clothes, he would wad them up and stash them behind the train tracks. He would go into your house, he would grab the axe from your woodpile. He was a professional lumberjack. He would just go in, charge in immediately in the first 2 minutes and a half. Everybody would get hit in the head with a blunt side of an axe. Then he would set up the house and do whatever he did at his leisure. If you were within the sight of the neighbors, that was the end of it. If you were not within the sight of neighborhoods, he would set your house on fire. Then he would, if you were within sight of the neighbors, he would jam all of the doors shut from the inside. He would jam stuff in there, which has the effect, because every single one of these, it's the same thing that happens afterwards, which is people show up, they're like, this guy didn't show up for work, what's going on? His doors are locked. Okay, let's go find some other people. It takes a couple hours to get enough people of enough authority to feel like we're going to break into this guy's house. He deals with your house. He washes off the axe handle, because he knows about fingerprinting, washes off his hands, leaves your house, possibly switches into the clean, bloodless clothes, hops the next freight that comes by that night, probably throws the bloody clothes out at some random crossing. Most of these murders, by the way, not just near the train tracks, but at the crossing of two train tracks. So you're doubling your chances of there being a freight train. And then he's gone. And then what happens is that the police see that this murder happened. In this one instance, people are like, that short, weird German guy with the blonde hair, with the long hair, Paul Mueller, is walking around at night and not talking to anybody. Mm-hmm. What the crap is going on? Walking towards the train. What the heck is going on? The rest of the time, they're like, it's more than 24 hours by the time anybody realizes it's a real problem. They put the bloodhounds out. That doesn't do anything. And basically, they're just like,
they got to charge somebody.
Basically, they're right. They're just like, who is the lowest socially ranked person nearby? Like, mm-hmm. Is there a black guy nearby? Mm-hmm. Great. Is there 4 people nearby? Is there a crazy person nearby? Is there a brother-in-law who's maybe not that fancy nearby? Like, is there a friend who's not that fancy nearby? Whoever there, we'll just charge them. And especially interesting reading about, as somebody who watches a million cop shows, reading about criminal investigation 100 years ago, and that there sort of was no criminal investigation 100 years ago in almost every case. It was like, you kill some people in West Brookfield. Whoever's the constable of West Brookfield has never done a murder case. Nobody in the state of Massachusetts barely has ever researched a murder case. They have no sense of evidence collection.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be a really long time before anything official happens. So if this is your MO as a murderer, how would you ever get caught? You would never get caught.
Mm.
It's impossible. Anyway.
That's a terrifying story, Mike. Thanks for sharing.
And to finish up this page, during a family quarrel at the tenement of 23 Larkin Street, September 14th, 1896, John Early struck his sister Anne, wife of John Hogan, with the end of an umbrella rod. The point entered her brain, killing her, and Early was arrested by Officer John Dunn of Station 1. He was sentenced to the House of Correction for a short term. This is a story I also found in contemporary reports of. I'm still not 100% sure why other people here get life in prison for killing people, and John Early for killing his sister with an umbrella, short term. Give him a month.
It does sound like there might be some credit given for the ingenuity. So, like, again, if you're shooting at balloons and you're using that as an excuse as to trying to kill somebody, then you're only going to do 6 months. You figure out a way to murder somebody with an umbrella. I mean, you had to think that went through a little bit.
Let me tell you, though, this axe thing, this thing of, like, well, it's not only did he kill him with the blunt side of an axe, but he killed a whole family with this.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there was no credit for ingenuity there, man. They were all over it. They reported about this day after day after day. All the papers reported about this day after day after day. This is one of the most, not the most, but one of the best researched.
About what year are we talking about here?
This is from the 1890s. All those crimes were from the 1890s.
So we're barely past Jack the Ripper there.
We are barely past Jack the Ripper. That's right. That's right.
So yeah, most this idea of a serial killer still hasn't really caught on.
Right, and I mean this is part of the problem as he reports it, is that frequently the local law enforcement guy would come upon this and he would tell the press, well, obviously this is a maniac. This is an insane tramp who did this.
Mm-hmm.
But then within a day they would be, you know what, it was probably the brother-in-law because he was probably mad at them over money or something. And it's like, what changed your mind? And the answer what changed your mind is like, probably you can't catch an insane tramp.
Right.
You can catch the brother-in-law.
Mm-hmm. Well,
So
that's a big part of
yeah, and that also, like, I do wonder how much of it is that people didn't have the idea of a serial killer, so the idea of irrational killing wasn't acceptable to them, or to what extent it was just like, well,
irrational killing was probably acceptable to them. They just
I'm not saying acceptable to them. I'm just saying like I feel like people's awareness of human evil has probably always been pretty much the same.
But the idea that Occam's razor does generally favor, and in most murders today,
Yes.
it favors, most people are murdered by somebody they know.
Right. Yes.
That even
Crimes in general, really.
Crimes in general,
other than
usually-
your property crimes that are of opportunity.
your mad roving serial killers
Mhm.
are such an outlier.
Yeah. Well, they look,
exist, but they're an outlier.
Yes. Well, they look at the number of full family killings in the United States in these decades, and they're like, not in almost all of them, in about half of them, it seems very obvious from contemporary reports. It's like, and the person who killed them was the guy who was standing in front of the house with the bloody axe when the neighbor came over a minute later. It's that kind of a thing.
That's usually a
Or
clue.
or it's the guy who then went to his house and shot himself in the head, all covered with the blood of the victims. It's like something obvious like that. The other half of them, in a lot of years, is Paul Mueller. Very creepy stuff. Victor Infante, thanks for being on here to talk
Thanks for
to us
having me.
about the high and the low parts of human existence.
Always a pleasure.
Music and mayhem. Brendan Melican, you
Thank you,
also.
brother. Good seeing you.
Yeah, we'll talk to everybody next week. And remember, you can bench more than you think you can.